The rain drizzled softly on the windows of Roxanne's penthouse, casting a dim grey light over the room. She stared blankly at the city below, lost in thought, her reflection a ghost in the glass. New York was always alive, buzzing with energy, but for Roxanne, the noise was distant, muted, just like everything else in her life since the betrayal. Her grip on the coffee mug tightened. Desmond. Chloe. Their names felt like poison on her tongue. The pain was still fresh, even though 2 years had passed. 2 years of silence, of watching from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her phone buzzed, breaking her trance. She glanced at it. Felix's name lit up the screen. Felix. Hey, I'm outside. Got your favorite. Mind if I come up? Roxanne hesitated before typing a quick response. Roxanne. Doors open. She heard the soft knock a minute later, followed by Felix's familiar voice as he stepped into her apartment. Rox. You in here? In the living room, she called, not bothering to turn around. She heard the rustle of bags and the sound of him moving closer. She braced herself, knowing Felix would try to break through her armor again. Felix appeared beside her, holding up a paper bag with a small smile. Got your favorite croissants from that French bakery downtown. Figured you might need something sweet. Roxanne forced a smile, taking the bag from him without looking up. Thanks, Felix. He sat down next to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, but he didn't touch her. Felix had learned by now that she needed space, even though it hurt him. You okay? He asked softly. She shrugged, her eyes still glued to the rain. I'm fine. Felix sighed. He wasn't one to push, but he could feel the weight she carried. It was in the way she spoke, how she held herself, strong, but brittle. Like one more hit and she'd crumble. He wanted to tell her that she didn't need to be strong all the time, that he was here for her. But every time he tried, she would shut him out, retreating into herself like the walls of her penthouse. Rox, he began, but she cut him off. Felix, please, she said, her voice tired. Not today. I can't. He nodded slowly, understanding but heartbroken. He wished she'd let him in, but he knew her wounds ran deeper than anything he could fix with kind words or croissants. Desmond's betrayal had left her scarred, and no matter what he did, she kept him at arm's length. You know I'm not going anywhere, right? Felix said quietly, looking at her with soft eyes. I'll wait as long as it takes. Roxanne's throat tightened. She hated that Felix was so patient, so good. It made her feel worse because she didn't know if she could give him what he deserved. Not while her mind was consumed with the thought of revenge. Desmond and Chloe had taken everything from her, her marriage, her best friend, her sense of trust. Love had no place in her heart anymore. She finally looked at Felix, her eyes betraying the storm raging inside her. I don't know if I'll ever be able to let you in, Felix. And you deserve more than what I can give you right now. Felix reached out, gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. I'm not asking for more, Rox. I'm just asking for you. Later that night, Roxanne found herself alone again. Felix had left, and the quiet of her apartment was suffocating. She wandered into her home office, her sanctuary where she planned her revenge in secret. On the surface, Roxanne had rebuilt her life. She was the CEO of her own growing company, and no one knew it was all designed to take down Desmond's empire from within. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from her lawyer. Desmond's pushing for another hearing. Wants to claim more assets from your family's estate. We'll need to prepare. Roxanne's jaw clenched. Of course, Desmond would never stop. He wanted everything she had left, her family's fortune, her pride. But what he didn't know was that she had already positioned herself to strike. She just needed to wait a little longer. With a sharp exhale, she opened her laptop and began reviewing the latest reports from her secret company. Every detail, every contract, was a step toward Desmond's downfall. But as she scrolled through the files, a small window popped up, a notification for an old email account she hadn't used in years. It was Chloe's. Roxanne stared at the screen, her chest tightening. She and Chloe had shared everything back then, even email passwords. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Curiosity and anger swirled in her gut. What could Chloe possibly have been hiding? With a surge of adrenaline, Roxanne typed in the old password, and to her surprise, it worked. Her heart pounded as she opened the inbox, sifting through messages until one caught her eye. Subject: Desmond's plan is in motion. Roxanne clicked the email and began to read, her hands shaking. The words on the screen confirmed her worst fears. Chloe and Desmond had been working together all along, not just to betray her emotionally, but to ruin her financially. And worse, they were trying to pull Felix into their scheme, to use him as a pawn in their twisted game. Her vision blurred with rage. She had trusted Chloe. She had loved Desmond. And now they wanted to break her all over again, but not this time. Roxanne couldn't sleep that night. She sat hunched over her desk, rereading Chloe's emails, her fingers trembling with a mixture of fury and disgust. The betrayal cut deeper than she had ever imagined. Not only had Desmond cheated on her with her best friend, but they had both planned to destroy her, to rip apart everything she had left, her family's fortune, her dignity, and now, Felix. She closed her laptop with a snap and leaned back in her chair, staring up at the ceiling. She could feel the weight of her anger pressing down on her chest, heavy and suffocating. For so long, she had been playing this game of revenge carefully, meticulously, building her own company in secret, planning Desmond's downfall with precision. But this revelation that Chloe was still trying to manipulate her life, even after all these years, sent her blood boiling. The rain outside had intensified, tapping furiously against the window like a constant reminder of the storm brewing inside her. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Rox? Felix's voice was gentle, uncertain. Roxanne didn't answer at first, her mind still racing through the possibilities, through the lies, through the trap Chloe had set. She had to stay calm. She couldn't let Felix see the storm inside her. Not yet. Come in, she finally said, her voice strained but controlled. Felix pushed open the door, stepping into her office with his usual calm presence, but tonight, his face showed concern. He studied her for a moment, his eyes softening when he saw how tense she was. You didn't come to bed, he said quietly. Roxanne pressed her lips together, trying to force a smile, but it faltered. I had some work to do. Felix glanced at the laptop on her desk, the light still glowing faintly from under the closed lid. He didn't ask, but she could see the question in his eyes. What's really going on? Rox, he said, stepping closer. You know you don't have to do this alone. She looked up at him, and for a moment, her resolve wavered. She wanted to believe him, to let Felix in, to trust that he wouldn't become just another person in her life who would hurt her. But she couldn't. Not yet. I'm fine, Felix, she said, standing up and crossing her arms defensively. I've handled things on my own for this long. I can keep doing it. Felix's brow furrowed, frustration flickering in his eyes. I know you can handle it. But that's not what I'm saying. You don't have to. Roxanne shook her head, turning away from him, walking to the window. You don't understand, Felix. Desmond. Chloe, they've taken everything from me. They won't stop until they have nothing left to destroy. Felix stood behind her, the tension between them growing. His voice was soft but firm. And what about me, Rox? Am I part of this revenge plan too? She froze, his words hitting her like a punch to the gut. Slowly, she turned around to face him, her eyes wide with shock. What are you talking about? Felix took a deep breath, his hands slipping into his pockets as he looked at her with that familiar mix of patience and heartbreak. You've been so focused on tearing Desmond down, on getting back at Chloe, that I feel like I'm just collateral damage. That's not true, Roxanne said, her voice trembling. I love you, Rox, Felix interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. But you've been so consumed with revenge that I don't know if there's any room for me in your life anymore. The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity. Roxanne's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a lead blanket. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she hadn't pushed him away, but deep down, she knew he was right. Felix took a step closer, reaching out to gently touch her arm. I don't care about Desmond or Chloe. I care about you. But if you keep letting this anger control you, you're going to lose everything, Rox. Even me. The tears that Roxanne had fought so hard to keep at bay threatened to spill over. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let herself break down in front of him. I'm doing this for us, she whispered. For our future. So that Desmond can never hurt me again. Felix's hand tightened on her arm, but his voice was soft, almost pleading. You're doing this for you, Rox. You're letting him win by letting him control your life, even now. Don't you see that? She didn't want to see it. She didn't want to admit that her desire for revenge had taken over her entire life, that it had consumed her so completely that she couldn't see past it anymore. But Felix's words cut through the fog, forcing her to face the truth she had been avoiding. Roxanne swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the floor. I don't know how to stop, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Felix's fingers gently lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. Then let me help you, he said softly. Let me show you that you don't have to do this alone. Roxanne's heart ached at the sincerity in his voice. She wanted to believe him, to let him in, but the scars from Desmond's betrayal were still too fresh, too deep. Could she really trust Felix? Could she risk being hurt again? Before she could answer, Felix stepped back, giving her space. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression a mixture of hope and sadness. I'll be here when you're ready, Rox, he said quietly. But I won't wait forever. With that, he turned and walked out of the office, leaving her standing alone in the dim light, her thoughts swirling in a storm of doubt and regret. The following days were a blur for Roxanne. She threw herself into her work, her mind buzzing with plans for Desmond's downfall. But Felix's words lingered in the back of her mind, gnawing at her resolve. She couldn't let him go. Not like this. But before she could fix things with Felix, she had to deal with Desmond and Chloe. They had crossed the line, and now it was time to strike. Roxanne sat at her desk, her laptop open to Chloe's emails. She read through them again, her anger simmering as she pieced together their plan. Chloe had been trying to manipulate Felix, using him as a pawn to push Roxanne over the edge. Desmond had even instructed Chloe to seduce Felix if necessary, to drive a wedge between them. The thought of Felix with Chloe made Roxanne's stomach churn. But deep down, she knew Felix would never betray her like that. He wasn't like Desmond. He wasn't a liar, a cheater. But Chloe had always been manipulative, and Roxanne wouldn't put it past her to try. A plan began to form in Roxanne's mind. She would use the very tools Desmond and Chloe had used against her. She had all the evidence she needed in those emails, proof of their schemes, their lies. And with that proof, she could destroy them. But she couldn't do it alone. Taking a deep breath, Roxanne picked up her phone and dialed Felix's number. It rang twice before he answered, his voice cautious. Rox, I need your help, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Felix was silent for a moment before he spoke. With what? Roxanne closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her decision. With taking down Desmond and Chloe. I have proof, emails, documents. I can ruin them, Felix. But I need you by my side. Felix exhaled softly, and Roxanne could hear the hesitation in his voice. Rox, are you sure about this? Is this really what you want? Yes, she said firmly. But I need you. Not just for this. For everything. There was another pause, and Roxanne's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for his response. I'm on my way, Felix finally said. Roxanne paced her living room after hanging up with Felix, her heart racing in anticipation. She had always been good at keeping her emotions in check. Years of being with Desmond had taught her that much. But Felix. He made her feel things she wasn't sure she was ready to feel again. When she heard the knock at the door, she took a deep breath and steadied herself. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about letting someone in, someone who could get hurt in the crossfire. She wasn't sure if she could live with that, but she knew she couldn't let Desmond and Chloe win. Opening the door, she was met with Felix's worried face, his hair damp from the rain. He stood there in his worn jacket, not quite fitting in the glossy world of wealth that Desmond had once filled. But Felix didn't need wealth. His presence was enough to fill the empty spaces in Roxanne's heart. You didn't have to come so soon, she said softly, though she was grateful he did. Felix shook his head, stepping inside. You sounded like you needed me. Roxanne closed the door behind him, watching as he shrugged off his wet jacket and draped it over the chair. His eyes searched hers, full of the same concern that had been there in her office just days before. She gestured for him to sit, then sat down across from him, her hands clasped together in her lap. I found something, she said, cutting straight to the point. Emails from Chloe. Proof that they've been planning this for a long time. Desmond and Chloe, they wanted to take everything from me. Felix leaned forward, his eyes darkening as she spoke. What kind of proof? Roxanne opened her laptop, turning the screen toward him. Everything. They've been working together to blackmail me, to ruin me, and they used you as part of their plan. Felix stared at the screen, his jaw clenched. They thought I'd go along with it. They thought Chloe could seduce you, Roxanne said bitterly, her voice catching on the words. That I'd fall apart when I found out. Felix's eyes snapped up to hers, his expression hard. You know that would never happen, right? Roxanne swallowed, nodding, but the fear still lingered. I know. But they tried anyway. And I can't let them win, Felix. I can't let them destroy us. Felix reached across the table, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm, grounding her in the moment. Then we fight back. Together. Roxanne looked into his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just about revenge anymore. Maybe it was about something more, something she had been too afraid to admit to herself. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Roxanne and Felix worked in secret, gathering every piece of evidence they could find, building their case. Desmond's reputation was hanging by a thread, and Roxanne knew that one wrong move could bring it all crashing down. The emails weren't enough on their own. They needed more. So, Roxanne began digging through old records, conversations she had with Desmond during their marriage, financial documents he had tried to hide. It was all there, buried under layers of deceit. Felix, meanwhile, reached out to people in his network, honest people, unlike the snakes in Desmond's circle, people who could help spread the word once the truth came out. They weren't just going after Desmond's company, they were going after him. One night, while Roxanne sat at her desk going through old files, Felix came up behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. She leaned into his touch, her body weary from the constant tension. Almost done, she said, not looking up from the screen. Felix squeezed her shoulders gently. You need to rest, Rox. I can't. Not until this is over. Felix knelt down beside her, his face serious. We're going to win. I promise you. But you have to take care of yourself too. Roxanne turned to face him, her heart swelling at the concern in his eyes. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't alone. Like she could actually trust someone. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. What if it doesn't work? What if they win? Felix reached up, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. They won't. Because you're stronger than them, Rox. You've been through worse, and you came out on top. You'll do it again. She smiled softly, but the fear still lingered at the edges of her mind. I don't know what I'd do without you. You won't have to find out, he said, his voice steady. I'm not going anywhere. The day of reckoning came faster than either of them expected. Roxanne had managed to secure a meeting with Desmond's company shareholders, offering them a lifeline, salvage their assets by selling the company, but only if Desmond was removed entirely. It wasn't an easy sell. Desmond had built a powerful image over the years, but the evidence Roxanne had gathered was damning. Financial misconduct, shady dealings, and his plan to extort her family's fortune would be more than enough to convince the board to cut ties. The meeting was set for noon in a sleek conference room overlooking the city. The rain outside had turned into a torrential downpour, the grey clouds casting a somber mood over the city. Roxanne arrived early, her heart pounding in her chest as she prepared for the confrontation. Desmond arrived late, as expected, with Chloe by his side. She wore a smug expression, her eyes glinting with malicious glee as she glanced at Roxanne. Desmond, on the other hand, looked as arrogant as ever, his confidence unshaken despite the storm brewing beneath the surface. Well, Desmond drawled, taking a seat across from Roxanne. I didn't expect to see you here. You're looking determined. Roxanne didn't flinch. This is business, Desmond. You know how it works. Chloe smirked, leaning in close to Desmond. Oh, darling, she thinks she's playing with the big boys now. Isn't that cute? Roxanne ignored Chloe's jabs, keeping her eyes on Desmond. We both know why we're here. I've brought an offer to the board, and it's in their best interest to accept it. Desmond chuckled, shaking his head. You think you can just waltz in here and take what's mine? I built this company from the ground up. You were just a bystander. Roxanne's eyes narrowed. I was your partner. I know more about this company than you think. And now, you've left me no choice but to take it from you. Desmond leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. And how do you plan on doing that? Roxanne pulled out the stack of documents she had prepared, laying them on the table for everyone to see. With proof. Of your misconduct. Of your lies. And if the board doesn't remove you, I'll make sure this information goes public. Your reputation will be ruined. Desmond's confident smirk faltered, his eyes flicking to the documents. Chloe's smug expression dropped as well, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. You wouldn't, Chloe hissed. Roxanne raised an eyebrow. Try me. The room fell silent as the board members exchanged glances, clearly unsettled by the tension. Desmond shifted in his seat, his hands tightening into fists. You're bluffing, he spat, but Roxanne wasn't. Not anymore. She had come too far to back down now. She had the proof, and she had Felix by her side. She wasn't bluffing, and Desmond knew it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one of the board members cleared his throat. We'll consider the offer. Desmond shot to his feet, his face red with anger. You can't be serious. You're going to let this woman take everything from me? But the board had already made up their minds. Desmond's reign was over. As Roxanne stood to leave, Chloe glared at her, her voice venomous. You think you've won? This isn't over. Roxanne didn't bother to respond. She didn't need to. She had already won. A week later, Felix and Roxanne stood in the middle of a small, cozy farmhouse, a gift for Felix's parents, a symbol of the life they had built together. Felix wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they looked out the window at the rain-soaked fields. We did it, he murmured. Roxanne leaned back against him, a smile tugging at her lips. Yeah. We did. For the first time in a long time, Roxanne felt at peace. Desmond was out of her life, Chloe's schemes had been exposed, and she had found love again, real love, with a man who stood by her through it all. As they stood there together, the rain continued to fall, but it no longer felt like a storm. It felt like a cleansing, washing away the past and leaving them with a future full of hope.